Welcome to Lectionary Call-In for Tuesday, February 22nd of 2022, where two laypersons, a pastor and an academician, gather for about 45 to 50 minutes each week to discuss the Gospel Lectionary the coming Sunday. And this Sunday is February 27th. Each Tuesday we call in from wherever we may be at 6:30 a.m. Eastern Time. And for our friend Charles Willard in Minnesota, that's 5:30 a.m. Our little team is working.
It's snowing.
Is it really, Charles?
That's what it says. I didn't look out the window, but I see on my little sheet down here, the stick thing here on the bottom, it says snowing now. It's been predicting heavy snowfall for the next 3 days.
Oh, my.
Yeah.
Well, our little team is working to be faithful to Lectionary Year C, and that puts us in the Gospel of Luke on Sunday. And we hope this discussion will provide areas of focus and reflection. Here's how it works. We develop perspectives independently after the leadoff person shares some information, some ideas, and then in this room we share and we encourage and we challenge each other. And here are the folks joining us in today's discussion.
Charles Willard, Minnesota, snowing.
Bill Hall, St. Petersburg, Florida, not snowing yet.
I'm Sarah Mickelson. It's 62. It's not going to snow in Tampa. And it's my pleasure to introduce Don Upton today, who is our person who posed questions and will be our leadoff. Don Upton is attracted to the 3-year cycle of the lectionary because he does not trust his own intuition and loves the insights of friends in life. Don is a communications professional, trained as an attorney, and fascinated with the powers of collaboration and systems change. He helps regions, cities take on issues of public health, talent, economic mobility, and justice, and connects with leaders to help them confront their own assumptions about what benefits the communities most. Don is an ordained elder in the PCUS and lives in Charlotte, North Carolina. Don?
Thank you, Sarah. And it's a nice warm day in Charlotte today. And then Sarah Mickelson, I appreciate that, and I'm going to dive right into the scripture today. It's lengthy, so let's dig in for a few minutes to Luke 9:28 through 36, and 37 through 43a as well. And I'll be reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Now, about 8 days after these sayings, Jesus took with him Peter and John and James and went up to the mountain to pray. While he was praying, the appearance of his face changed, and his clothes became dazzling white. And suddenly they saw two men, Moses, Elijah, talking with him. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish in Jerusalem. Now Peter and his companions were weighted down with sleep, but since they had stayed awake, they saw his glory and the two men who stood with him. Just as they were leaving him, Peter said to Jesus, "Master, it is good for us to be here. Let us make 3 dwellings, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," not knowing what he said. While he was saying this, a cloud came and overshadowed them, and they were terrified as they entered the cloud. And from the cloud came a voice that said, "This is my son, my chosen. Listen to him." When the voice had spoken, Jesus was found alone, and they kept silent, and in those days told no one any of the things they had seen. On the next day, they came down from the mountain. A great crowd met him. Just then a man from the crowd shouted, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son. He is my only child." Suddenly a spirit seized him, and all at once he shrieks. It convulses him until he foams at the mouth. It mauls him and will scarcely leave him. I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not. Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." While he was coming, the demon dashed him to the ground in convulsions, but Jesus rebuked the unclean spirit, healed the boy, and gave him back to his father. And all were astounded at the greatness of God. And that's the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
I've got 3 questions for the team today, for the listener. They're related, so I'm going to read all 3, and then we'll come back to them one at a time. But the first question is, why did the lectionary committee pair this gospel passage with Exodus 34:29 through 35, which would be Moses shining, coming down from the mountain? And then the second question, verse 31 provides some details about the subject matter of the discussion. Why did the author of Luke think it necessary to highlight the topic of the conversation, the accomplishing of his departure? And then the third is exactly where or to whom is Jesus addressing his statement in verse 41, prior to be asking the boy to be brought forward, which involves the language, you faithless and perverse generation. How long? Well, back to the first one. And Sarah Mickelson, this one's coming at you. Why did the lectionary committee pair this gospel with a passage in Exodus 34:29 through 35? Yeah.
I found it helpful this week that Mark Davis, in his his explanation of this, referenced these words. He actually says that Jesus, Elijah, and Moses are talking about his exodus. And it lifted for me an interesting connection. Exodus means the road out or the way out. And so in thinking about that, it made me consider, when I looked at this question, how the word exodus is God's way of intervening and freeing captives in both situations. And so in the situation in the book with Moses, in Exodus, the book, its captives are being freed from Egypt, but in this particular explanation from Luke, I think it's the freeing of people from sin and death. So in both cases, Moses and Jesus act as a deliverer, bringing an expression directly from God, glistening and shiny, sharing God's glory with those that are listening, coming down from the mountain to share it with people. That felt really like a nice fit for me, a hand-in-glove experience, so to speak. In thinking about the way out, there's something lovely that although Moses didn't get to the promised land, he did get a glimpse of what was going to go down. And I think that's helpful. I do like the intersection between the law and the prophets, Moses being thought of as the law and Elijah being thought of as the prophets, and all those pieces coming together with God's glory to provide a way out for us.
Thanks, Sarah. Charles Willard, how about you?
I don't have a contribution right now.
That's all right. Bill Hull?
Thank you.
Welcome to everybody who's tuning in later, and thank you, Don, for, as always, challenging questions. Why did the committee pair this with Exodus? In one sense, it seems obvious. There are significant similarities between Moses on the mountain, Jesus transfigured, but I think there are also, if not dissimilarities, Jesus's experience takes the story to another level. It illustrates that there's a continuity between the Old and New Testaments. That's a familiar theme in the New Testament, that this is not something totally new and different and separate from what has preceded. There are many quotes in the New Testament from the Old Testament. This is yet another bridge and reminding us of the continuity. Obviously, both happened on a mountain. Both had to do with God's appearing. Now, it struck me as I read this time, Don, and reflected on your question, that a similarity is both men who predominate in these two stories are significant leaders. But Moses is being called he'd been called to a mission unlike what he wanted his life to be. He was hiding in a foreign country. He had fled because he'd murdered an Egyptian. his life was totally disrupted, and he's on the mountain receiving a message that he did not create, and he is commissioned by God to take those commandments to the people. I think somewhat in contrast, the transfiguration is validating what Jesus is already doing and who he is. Moses was given and then presented the Ten Commandments. Jesus was the fulfillment of the spirit of those commandments, interpreting them in a new and much more nuanced way. We know, we're well familiar with Jesus summarizing the law, quoting from two different parts of the Old Testament, to love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus is often quoted as saying, you have heard that it has been said, but I say to you. So Jesus took the Ten Commandments to another, deeper, more challenging level. So I think that continuity, I don't know if I want to say discontinuity, but similarities, dissimilarities, each is a distinct person who had a unique role, but Jesus is the fulfillment of that. And as you noted, Sarah, it is significant that it was Moses and Elijah who appeared with Jesus, illustrating that continuity. Now, ultimately, as we often say about interpreting a Bible passage, ultimately we don't know exactly what the lectionary committee's thinking was, but I think this is an obvious one, a connection that yet again, which is what I hope this podcast provides, an opportunity to hear the same story and perhaps encounter it in a new and different way, just as Jesus took the message of the commandments to a new level.
I know when we talked about this in the past, I've taken a position, mostly in the other Gospels, not the Luke Gospel, that we're looking at the timeless Jesus. In some cases, you could say the post-resurrection, the eternal Jesus, the timelessness of it. I'm going to reverse that today and talk about Jesus, Son of Man, fully human. And the reason I'm bringing that up is the Exodus passage, that this is familiar. We have seen this before. People shine when they've been in the presence of the Creator. The human being shines. The prophet shines. The intermediary shines. And I wanted to put that out just as especially in this gospel, a different approach than the eternal Jesus, that this is Jesus in time. Jesus a man, a human being. Because what I'm looking through the scriptures, we've been there before, and it's people who shine, not the God. So this is fully human Jesus shining. The intermediate shines. The person that has to be separate to go before the Creator shines and then comes back. And then to add a little bit to it, I was looking at Robert Alter's translation of the Exodus passage, and if you ever look at it, the footnotes is the fun stuff in his translation. But he talks about the emphasis on Moses. And when he came down, it says that Moses came down. It says his name 3 times as he comes down. And he says it serves here to throw a kind of spotlight on Moses, who after 40 days with God is set off visibly from the rest of humankind. And so I'm back to thinking about Jesus in that way. The skin of his face glowed. I'm quoting the footnote from Alter's translation. He says the skin of his face, others have imagined that it would indicate horn-like toughness of the skin. That's the passage where we talk about Moses being horned, which was not the appropriate translation. A kind of radiation burn after exposure to the divine effulgence. It makes more sense to see something terrifying, luminous, a reflection of the divine fire glimpsed by the people from the foot of the mountain, rather than a disfiguration of Moses' face. A notion of divine radiance enveloping the head, or face of a god, a king, or a priest appears in numerous Mesopotamian texts. And then he finally says, if it seems likely Moses' face is giving off a sort of supernatural radiance, the fear of drawing near him precisely parallels the people's fear of drawing near to the fiery presence of God on the mountaintop. So for your consideration, not the eternal Jesus, but the Jesus in time, like all people who confront the Creator, their faces are changed with this, whatever that encounter is. Well, I'm going to go to the next question. And Bill Hull, this one will be coming at you. Verse 31 provides some details about the subject matter of the discussion. Why did the author of Luke think it necessary to highlight the topic of the conversation, accomplishing his departure? And I'll read that one. They appeared in glory and were speaking of his departure, which he was about to accomplish at Jerusalem. Bill?
Again, a challenging question. Is that echoing?
Yeah, you're muted. Redo your mute. You're no longer muted on the recording podcast.
Oh, I don't know how that happened. Can you hear me okay now? Okay. Sorry about that. Why is this included? It set me to looking at the larger context. Luke chapter 9 begins with Jesus' gathering the disciples and commissioning them to be healers and proclaimers of good news. Jesus then feeds the 5,000, followed by his prediction to his disciples that he would suffer and die. So the disciples have already been signaled about what you're highlighting, Don. And then comes the transfiguration, which is itself followed by the healing of a young boy. By the way, Don, I'm glad you included that. Many versions of the lectionary do not couple the transfiguration with the healing of the boy. I think it is absolutely essential that we couple those. And then again, after that healing, Jesus declares he will be betrayed. So just within this one chapter, if my count is right, there are three different times that Jesus' quote departure, his suffering and dying, are predicted. And it's ironic to me that after that third comment about his suffering, the disciples start arguing among themselves who will be the greatest. What a powerful picture of cluelessness and of reverting to the baser elements of the human nature. And among the synoptics, this story is in all three synoptics. Luke is the only one who notes the content of the conversation among Jesus, Moses, and Elijah. So it was important to Luke. And we can't know for certain what Luke's purpose was and how he shaped his narrative, but it is clear that the larger context presents a landscape depicting light and darkness in the human journey. That is something I resonate with, that I think the Bible consistently depicts in this story the mountaintop and the valley. At the mountaintop, glowing, mystery, transfiguration. At the base of the mountain, a boy possessed that the disciples could not heal. And your next question deals with that, so I'll reserve some more comments till then. I think, Don, that Luke continues that style of narrative, and I can relate to that. It's almost a law in human experience that the moment you get to the top of a mountain, however that happens, metaphorically or literally. The next step you take is down the mountain. In my backpacking days, I had some powerful, I would even be bold enough to say, experiences of transfiguration, not mine, but viewing nature from 4,000 feet on the Appalachian Trail just as dawn occurs. And literally, as far as you can see, there is this forest that I had nothing to do with creating. And I've had some really powerful, and it wasn't that I was trying to conjure it up. It really was a gift. But that happened leading teenagers, high schoolers, in the summer through Cedar Kirk on a backpacking trip. And I guarantee you, dealing with a dozen teenagers during the rest of the day was a different kind of experience. They could be very challenging and even difficult at times. So I will stop with this, that I find it helpful to be reminded that we need the mountaintop, but we can't camp there. There's a valley waiting for us to enter. Thank you, Don.
Thank you. How about you, Sarah? Why are we giving a little extra information on this one?
Well, I don't really know, but do you think that Jesus was having some concern about what was coming toward him? I don't know. If you knew, I'm often nervous about something that I know is a big thing coming toward me, and it helps to have people around me who are a part of that story, meeting with me to say, hey, you know what's going to happen, here's what we're going to do, and we have it organized, and we have a schedule, and we kind of have the sense of the steps that are going to be involved, and you've rehearsed it. So that often brings me comfort. I don't know if this is Jesus having a conversation with Elijah and Moses in an effort to bring comfort for something we know is going to be difficult. Is it a privilege, a gift to Elijah and Moses to have this sense of how God's going to resolve this tear between humanity and himself or herself, which is a sweet thing for God to do, to bring Elijah and Moses into the story? Is it a solidification of just how, without our perception, the continuity of God's pursuit of humanity to stay in relationship and in covenant with us? Is it God's demonstration of that through the prophets and through the law and finally through the life of Jesus, where God says, this is a deliberation on my part. I'm intentional in doing this. And I think that that's, for me, what's valuable about having the privilege of Luke taking down this note about what they spoke of. So for me, that's a sweetness, that it has been planned, that it is deliberate, that it is a demonstration of surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. So that's how I see it, that it's a privilege and a gift for us to overhear that.
Thank you. Read about the mountaintop or the encounters with the Creator. It seems lonely sometimes. You're by yourself with God. Moses by himself with God, and this is a little bit different. There are others with him, a timeless group, and the disciples in time. But I never thought about being with God, being on the mountain. Let's use Moses, is almost an exile in itself. To go to be with God, you exile yourself from human beings. Moses goes up away from the people in isolation, alone. There's a loneliness about it. It's strange. May sound strange, but it's lonely. It's just the human being and the Creator, and then he goes back, something that's entirely different at the bottom of the mountain. And I wonder how much that applies to Jesus in exile, alone with God. Makes me think of the garden. You think of the prayer, alone. The disciples fall asleep. There's the heavy sleepiness again, right? And they go to sleep. I'm jumping Gospels, and I've just thought about it. There's an exile involved, which I think is connected to the promise that to end the exile. It's Eden-like almost, like to go to be with God, you must leave people. And now he's being surrounded by people. A few years back, John Debevoise, who's the senior pastor at Palmacia Presbyterian Church, had a theme, and I really didn't capture it all, but his theme of the sermon around this gospel was, who comes to you? Who surrounds you? Which I thought was very sweet looking back on it and listening to you, Sarah, about how we surround ourselves. So Jesus being ministered to through history and time, and there are witnesses there. That is weird. Witnesses to this. That's not what the scriptures say. The scriptures says you will be alone. So I think there's this theme of aloneness, which we deal with Jesus through this book and the gospel. The aloneness is strong. The aloneness with God. The aloneness in the wilderness. The aloneness. And then we've got him even later on in trial, and he is abandoned. So I'm interested in that and the departure that has to take place as Moses goes and comes back. There's something different about this one. But it also helps me go back to the answer to the first question, which is, this time for me, this is the human Jesus. He shines because humans shine when they're in the presence of God. How about you, Charles Willard? Any thoughts on this one?
Well, it is a puzzle, and I'm sorry, all I can do is to share with you puzzles. My first question was, I wonder what Moses and Elijah looked like. I mean, we're talking about people who had not been around in physical presence like this, looking, meeting and talking to people for generations, for centuries, for a long time. And so one question I have, but apparently it didn't occur to Luke, and it doesn't seem to have occurred to the other disciples. It just says they saw two men, Moses and Elijah, talking to him. I was wondering, what in the world could they have seen that said to them and informed them that the two appearances, the two people they saw, the two images they saw were Moses and Elijah. It's a secret, because then it says Peter and his companions were weighed down with sleep. But since they had stayed awake, I don't, what's it says they're asleep, but they stayed awake. So which did they do? Were they asleep or were they awake? But anyway, they got to see all these things, and then Peter went off because he couldn't think of anything better to say. And let's build two, what did you call them in this particular translation here? Let's build two dwellings, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for you, Jesus. And it's not until after all that happens that the Lord appears, or the Lord appears in a cloud. And excuse me just a minute, I have to stop my awake call here. Just a minute. Oh dear, now it's going to come back later. But it's just a strange thing, and I think Luke is simply sharing with us some of his experience that he understands occurred at this place and time, and he's putting in the details, even though the details don't seem to be very well connected.
Thanks, Charles. And, that's a nice segue into the next one, because not only is it hard to fit the pieces together, whether it's in time or out of time, sleep or awake, in cloud, out of cloud, but we're going back down the mountain to a normal day. Now, okay, so, all right, all this, and then here we are, a regular day, everybody. Here we go. So, Sarah, I'll put this out for you to start. exactly where or to whom is Jesus addressing his statement in verse 41 prior to asking the boy to be brought forward? So let me go to verse 41. It says, Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you to bear with you? Bring your son here." Sarah?
Well, and that passage is preceded by, "I begged your disciples to cast it out, but they could not."
Yeah.
So for me, I wonder if that particular passage is addressed to the disciples. And Jesus being tired that they're just not getting it. And more to the point, I think it's addressed to us. Because we're just like them in that we fail to see the need of the people around us to respond to that. We walk on by frequently instead of recognizing the wholeness that needs to be returned to people. So in this case, the young boy needs to be healed, and instead of seeing the wholeness of the child, they're distracted by their ability or their lack of ability. And so maybe it is, our lack of mustard seed faith that prevents us from seeing the glory of God. Because they didn't get to go up the mountain with Peter, James, and John.
Charles, any comments on this one?
No, I don't.
Excuse me.
Well, one of the reasons I added this as a question is the out of sync. We have out of time. We're on the mountain. We're shining. We've witnessed to the eternal. Why don't we throw in a regular day? And it just hit me more strongly than ever. What is it to be shining and then to go back into a regular day? What is it to witness this thing? And I made a few notes here. This was just last night. I'm like, what is that? What is to be confronted with a regular day? The world is a mess. How about that? It's just exasperation. How about that? The world's a mess. It's difficult to see the Creator right now. It is difficult to see love or hope right now. I sense that in all of you. This is a regular day, and no special day. It's a regular day. And even the dealing with the ability to be healed or not healed, or what's happening. We could apply science to this. What's really happening with this boy? But the world is a mess. It's a regular day. It's exhausting. It's exasperating. And it's as if, kind of to your point, Sarah, as if there's no escape anyway. It's a mess. There's no escape. There is no exit here in this place now, despite the fact that the first passages took us to the eternal. Oh, I'm exasperated. And I'm wondering if there's something in that for Jesus as well. What does a prophet who's even been shining say to this? Even the Son of Man. Oh, when is this going to be over? And it seems like there's this separation between the exile of the mountain. They got the anger of Moses coming back down, Oh, my gosh, how long does this go on? So I'm wondering, Sarah, for me it raises the question of, have you experienced the timelessness of the Creator? Have I? Have I really? Have I sensed that? Have I felt the generations? Have I felt the saving grace? Have I felt the Spirit? And if I have, by the way, everybody who's listening, we're beginning a new day. The sun's coming up where I am. I think Charles Willard, Minnesota, the sun's coming up. This is going to be a normal day. Oh, I'm already exhausted thinking about it. I think
the sun is not coming up here yet.
Well, and once again, Charles Willard, fact check, even the rise of the sun. Professor, thank you, brother. Bill Hall, what do you think?
Oh, well, I think I'm going to echo what you're saying, and particularly Sarah. I think this initially was addressed to those within the hearing of Jesus, perhaps especially to the disciples and the crowd around him. But I think by Luke including this, it becomes an observation about every generation. And I, of course, like all of us, am reading this in the here and now in the context of all that we're going through with the pandemic, with the disruption in Europe and the possibility of war. And it occurred to me that the capacity to believe that healing is possible, coupled with the confidence that one might be an instrument of restoration, is a compellingly difficult capacity to believe is possible and it can be acted on. My fantasy is the disciples at the foot of the mountain, as you noted, Don, they were not at the top of the mountain. They only, presumably only later heard that. But remember, this chapter starts with Jesus commissioning the disciples to go and heal. Okay? So my fantasy is the disciples, in the face of this compelling challenge with this young boy who's convulsed, they did not believe that they had the capacity to act. And I can identify with that. In light of all this going on right now, it's easy to despair and to think, I can't make a difference. The forces that are leading toward disruption and destruction seem overwhelming. Also, Don, to me, this narrative illustrates that healing and restoration are possible, but those who act on that belief are not immune to rejection, suffering, and even death. Look at what's the number of people who are denigrating and even rejecting medical science. Medical science, I don't expect perfection from medical science. My mother was a registered nurse, and I heard her struggle with, we did the best we could, but we couldn't save that person, and what's best to do. I don't look for them to be omniscient, but they are committed to the greater good, and look at how that science has been treated by many, including national leaders. Therefore, for me, Don, this is a powerful commentary on the forces within human nature that reject wholeness and unity. This is a compelling message for us today in the face of the threat of war in Europe, the fracturing of society physically and socially by the pandemic, and the ghastly toxic atmosphere among leaders locally, nationally, and globally, not just among leaders, but among the populace. And I realize that my comments are very much shaped by our present context, but I think it illustrates Jesus' frustration. You have the capacity to act for wholeness and restoration, and here you are being ineffective. Now, if I may for a moment, again, my bias toward the larger context. After where you stopped reading, Don, I'll read a few verses. The people were astounded at the greatness of God. While everyone was amazed at all Jesus was doing, he said to his disciples, "Let these words sink into your ears." I like that translation. They're not going to sink easily. It's a difficult journey for that message to even be heard, much less understood. He said, again, the Son of Man is going to be betrayed into human hands. But they did not understand this saying. Its meaning was concealed from them so that they could not perceive it, and they were afraid to ask him about this saying. Again, that resistance to recognizing our capacity for good and our reluctance to seek to act for the greater good. And those words echo, let this sink into your ears.
Thank you. Well, we're about out of time. Before we say goodbye, I just want to go around and see if there's anything else this family wants to add. Just checking in. Good to go, Charles?
I still am puzzled by the way that this got connected. I mean, the disciples, they had demonstrated their capacity to heal people. That had happened. They'd gone out and they'd done it 2 by 2. And there's no attempt by Luke to account for or to explain the sudden inability of the disciples to do what they had done before. So I'm left with a puzzle, not with a clear path forward.
I have a life experience example of that. When you leave your adult children in charge, and they do a good job, as soon as you come home, they abandon that responsibility to yield it back to you, and then they forget to be participants in the process that they were commanding. So it's almost like, oh, Mom, I'm glad you're home. What are you making for dinner? When they were able to make their own dinner the night before and not have any problem. So I'm curious about this measure of maturity on the part of the disciples, because maybe they are able and capable, but as soon as Jesus reemerges from wherever Jesus has been, they go, oh, we can't do it anymore, which is typical of people who are not yet in full awareness of the ability that they have. Or they're just plain lazy. I haven't really gotten to the answer to that one yet.
And Don,
Go ahead,
I will briefly restate something I made earlier about the exhilaration of the mountaintop and, as you say, the ordinary day at the foot of the mountain. The lectionary helps highlight that, because next week, the first Sunday of Lent, we go to the temptation. So transfiguration in the lectionary world is followed by temptation. Again, I think a accurate mirror of the human experience.
Thank you. There's probably, and this would be for the next time we go on the 3-year cycle, a question about the church after the departure of Christ, after the promise. What is the church doing with all these things in mind? And I think I've heard sermons in the past that say, let's consider the church in this. And so now I'm thinking about Paul being knocked down and not alone, but surrounded by followers of Jesus, holding his hand, explaining to him what's going on. You are not alone. You have encountered the divine. Let me talk to you about what's going on, and they are with him all the way through. And there's the church. Well, for folks listening in, Palma Cia Presbyterian Church is at 3501 West San Jose Street. That's in Tampa, Florida. And for more information, you can go to palmacia.org. That's PALMACEIA.org. I always highlight that because Palma Cia is the encourager of the 4 of us getting together. Hopefully the encourager is you, the listener. They provide the support, and we're part of that faith formation work that they do, and we appreciate it very much. And we commend that site to you for great sermons, other discussions of Scripture, differences of opinion, prayer, outstanding music, and also opportunities to take communion as you look in from a distance. And you're always welcome, and we'll see you next time.